let's just mark the markets and see what they're doing at this point in time, given the fact that we fizzled out from these opening levels, and now, right now, markets are trading flat. In fact, we slipped to the negative territory when you talk about the Nifty. Let's take a look at what the pharma index is doing, because that particular sector has been in the limelight of late, given the fact that there's a lot of rhetoric coming on the tariff front, whether the sector would get a respite on that particular front or no. But today, as you can see, at the day's lowest point, 1.8% downtick coming in for Nifty Pharma. And let's dwell in further to understand the outlook coming in for the pharmaceutical industry. We have Vishal Manchanda, who is the Senior VP Institutional Research at Systematics Group, joining us this morning. A very good morning to you, Vishal. Thank you so much for making time to join us on the show. And firstly, let me ask you about what sort of a scenario are you seeing for entire pharma sector, given the fact that a lot has been talked about when you talk about the United States, the tariff, whether we will see some tariffs on pharmaceuticals or we will not see. So in light of that, how should one place their bets, or how should they actually gauge this entire space?
Right. So, good morning. So I think pharma is one sector where India is fundamentally very strong. And with respect to tariffs that we have been speculating, I think it's going to be harmful for both countries if tariffs are placed on the pharma sector, because neither the US has capacities to manufacture pharmaceutical drugs in-house, nor there is a cheaper alternative compared to India in the entire world that can supply them generic drugs. So my sense is tariffs, if at all they happen, they are going to be unproductive for both countries. And if I kind of go to the outlook, like how the sector looks like, so I think pharma is in a transition phase wherein I think FY27 is going to be a bit difficult, because the US business might be a bit weak for the larger names like Sun, Cipla, Reddy's, and others. But the rest of the business, India should be on a secular growth trajectory, 9%, the rest of the world markets, emerging markets, all of those should be around 8 to 11% growth trajectory. The US perhaps can slow down and also dent margins for the sector. But there are efforts on, companies are trying to kind of get new avenues, new platforms that can ensure they are better diversified for the future and their dependence on US is lower.
Hi Vishal, this is Shrishti also joining in, but give us a sense on the pricing as well, because of late in the earnings season, we haven't seen any significant commentary coming in from the pharma majors on the pricing front. But as we know, in the US, the focus is to reduce the drug prices. How do you see the pricing environment changing for the Indian pharma companies?
So I think the generic drug prices remains in the same zone. Like we are seeing an annual decline of 5 to 9%. That remains, and I think that will continue for the future too. While the focus, the US government focus is to cut prices on drugs, but they would rather look to focus on the innovator drugs, the NCE drugs, where there is a much larger scope to cut prices. So if I look at the prescription drug spending in the US, about 90% of that spending would be going towards the NCE, the innovator drugs, and only 10% of the spending is going towards the generic drugs. So, and again, generic drugs are probably kind of the US gets them cheapest at the lowest prices, and I don't think there is a scope to cut prices on the generic side. So, but there is a very large scope on the innovator drugs. And in fact, US spends the most as far as innovator drugs is concerned. Prices are also highest when we look at US prices compared to the European prices or other prices in other markets for innovator drugs.
All right. So Vishal, good to note your point on the generic drug pricing. So for now, there's not much to worry for the Indian pharma names at least. But Vishal, also help us with an understanding that how do you see this whole China plus one theme coming back into the place? Because just now what we have seen in the announcement, there hasn't been any major announcement coming in for the pharma players. And as we know that US is having a harsh stance on China as an economy, do you believe that any segment is expected to benefit the most out of this scenario, maybe the CDMO side?
I think it's the CDMO side is benefiting. We are seeing all CDMO companies doing quite well, and all of them have been talking about higher client inquiries, higher conversion of client inquiries into contracts. So all of those things continue to happen, and I think the China Plus One factor is playing, irrespective of the Biosecure Act coming through or not. So companies continue to move out of China, give more business to India. So that's happening. I think that's happening.
Right. Vishal, we've seen a couple of counters, and let me actually switch focus now to earnings, because you've seen a couple of pharmaceutical companies which have been dependent on a particular drug and the success of that drug, which meant that that could do wonders for their earnings, but that's not how it transpired. Case in point being Natco Pharma, or for the matter of fact, Orchid Pharma as well. I want to understand, how should one actually gauge while looking at these sort of companies, and which one would be a top pick amongst the pharma pack at this point in time?
So I think in pharma, we always would have a significant part of earnings coming from specific pockets. So I think that's true for almost all companies. So we need to be kind of very cautious while assigning multiples to the earnings that pharma companies make. So that requires in-depth understanding of the portfolio and the contribution that comes from various drugs in the portfolio. So right now, if I look at the pharma space, there is significant dependence for the larger companies on one single drug. And I think FY27 we'll see the impact of that dependence flowing into the numbers, negative impact of that dependence flowing into the numbers. So if I would want to pick a name where which is relatively immune from these fluctuation, I would prefer Sun Pharma as my top pick, followed by Cipla.
Vishal, with this, we'll let you go on that. Really appreciate you taking the time out and speaking with us and give us a sense that what's happening with the pharma space right now and what's the outlook.